right, everyone, welcome back to the show. Today's guest, Damian, drawing from skills learned as a CEO, business founder, operational efficiency professional, commercial and contracts expert, corporate recovery specialist, and in Australia's Special Air Force Regiment, Damian demystifies the simple and easy steps to rapidly attracting your goals to you. Damian, welcome to the show.
Yes, Scott, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me and really appreciate that. And for those listening, you know, we're a little bit past it, but we were talking before the show started about Tom Brady, and I know you're a big fan. So yeah, good on Tom Brady for retiring and moving on.
I'm sad. I didn't want him to retire. I was one of the few who's like, I wanted to play one, just give me one more year. And I feel like it's just a bad way to go out. It's just a bad year to go. I feel like he could have done better, and it was but it is what it is, and it looks like he's done for good this time. I'm sad. He's my favorite. He is my favorite athlete of all time. So people who don't like me already, there's another reason not to like me. But Tom Brady is my favorite athlete of all time for various reasons. So it's a very sad day for me, for sure.
Yeah, well, it is like that though. With one, you say one more year, and I had that with a bit of a health kick that I was on as well, where I love chocolate, and I'm also a corporate person, so a corporate recovery person, contracts. I'm very good at that kind of thing, and so I've set myself the goal and said, okay, I'll only eat the first row of the chocolate bar. That's all I will eat.
The first,
you got the chocolate bar, and you got the only the first roll, and then I ate that, and then I looked at it and went, well, technically now this is the first row, and so I finished the block of chocolates.
I was thinking you meant like a box of chocolates, and there's like 8 in the first row, and there's like 5 rows.
The same principle applies.
I was like, damn, okay, like the first row, that's like a whole week for me, so that's pretty good. So, that's funny. Yeah, just one more year, just one more piece of candy.
Exactly. Well, so that's what look at. You got the bar of chocolate. You take the top row off, and then the next one's the top row.
It's the top. So I actually haven't.
I have to eat it.
I haven't eaten it. I said I would eat it. I haven't eaten it yet, so I have to. So I get it. No, it makes sense. So all right. So I want to give people a little bit of background on you. So let's kind of start. Your whole thing. As we were talking, life is easy, and I want to kind of dive deep into this because, please show me, because tell us how can we make our lives easier, whether it's fitness, money, whatever. Your secrets to success, I think everyone's kind of dying to know about. So first things first, though, kind of going, we talked about your background a little bit in the intro there. So I guess give us a little bit of your background, and then we'll jumpstart from there.
Yeah, well, when I was like most people, I went to school, and like most people, I didn't like school, and I didn't want to be there. Nearing the end of the school, my dad said I wasn't allowed to leave unless I had a job. And a couple of weeks later, Army recruitment people came around. So I went, okay, great way to get out of school. So it wasn't like I had a goal of anything, because I didn't. And I just didn't want to do school. So my goal was to avoid doing things. And so I went to, that was my goal. And so I joined the Army, and I quickly found that, running around the bush, Australia doesn't have a forest. We just have one bush. It's called the bush, as you're probably aware. And so it was running around the bush, and it was like, I was thinking, I really maybe didn't really think through this very well. It's not something that I'm enjoying doing. But there are, as your listeners will be aware, that multiple careers within the defence forces. And so there was a number of good jobs like signals and other stuff that wasn't infantry that you could do. But I was mature enough to recognize that I wasn't going to get one of those jobs. And anyone who didn't get one of those jobs, because there was limited positions, went to infantry. However, there was one position that no one was applying for. And I was 18 at the time, and it was a chef's position. And my first thought was, well, girls like guys that can cook. That was my motivation.
That's key. You're right. That's okay. Good. Okay, you got that.
So this was in order of priority. Girls like guys that can cook. It will get me out of going to the infantry. And 3 was maybe it could be a career after if I leave the Army. So highly prioritized, as you can see, as my thinking as an 18-year-old. Anyway, so I've gone to the School of Cooks, where they actually teach very gourmet cooking as well, so it was quite full on. But while I was there, they asked one of the guys that was in the course with me, did he want to go to Perth? And I just happened to be next to him when he was asked, and he'd just come from there and said, no, I don't want to go back to Perth. I don't want to go there. And I went, I'll go to Perth. I know I'm from Victoria for geographic reasons, for where you guys are from. It's the equivalent being LA and New York.
Oh wow, that's far.
Yes,
Yeah.
and Victoria is the East Coast. Perth is the West Coast. So for me, it was like I just want to get as far away from home as possible. So I'll go to Perth, and they said, okay, if you pass the psychological test, you can go. And I went, yeah, no problem. Didn't even thinking about what it was. That was like, yeah. So anyway, I did the psychological test. I passed it. I literally drove across the country. So from one side to the other. It
That's
took me 4 days to drive across. Yeah.
How many actual hours of driving time is it to drive across Australia?
Well, so it took me 4.5 days, and I drove for a long time, and just kind of slept briefly, and then continued to drive. So I think I don't know. I haven't looked it up. Long way. It's pretty. I think it's pretty similar to New York to LA. Anyway, so I get there, and it turns out that it's the SAS, which is Australian Special Forces, the best of the best. So I'm there as a cook, but also jumping out of airplanes, parachuting, rock climbing, bazookas, doing all this kind of stuff. So, and someone said, well, you were like Steven Seagal in Under Siege. And it was like, well, yeah, maybe. And so I did that. And I had a lot of fun doing that. I got to do a lot of things that people get paid to do, is it jumping at airplanes, that kind of thing. So I was paid to do that where people pay that. But after a while, I thought, no, this is really not what I want to do. Again, not thinking about what I did want to do. So I did my time, and I got out, and I was fluffing around in Perth, not really doing much. And a friend said, oh, there's good money up in the mine site. And I like money, so that's probably a good idea. And so I decided what I'd do is I found the 5 biggest contractors that did work up there, and I wrote out, this was before, I'm older than I look. It was before computers. So I hand wrote a letter of application to each of the 5, and I sent that off. And then the next day I rewrote another letter of application and sent it off the same. I did this for 2 weeks, every day, hand wrote a letter and sent it off.
It's commitment.
After 2 weeks, yeah, one of the contractors called up and said exactly that. You say I'm committed. Come in for an interview. So I got the job, and I went up there and worked in the mine sites, building bridges and leach pads and all kind of stuff. But then I got a bit homesick, and I came back to where I'm from, Victoria, realized that what my dad said was probably about education was probably a good thing. Education's a good thing. So I went to university as a mature age student, studied commerce, accounting, and law. I wouldn't recommend accounting and law for excitement, but there is some fundamental need to understand the basis of what there are in life. And there's 3 principles related to that I'll talk to you about later. And then I worked in corporate recovery for a while, decided that's where I wanted to be. And that was actually a decision. First decision, I think it was I want to work in corporate recovery. So I did that, and I spent about 9 years doing that, which was basically taking over companies, splitting them up or selling them off. I like to think of myself, it was kind of like Richard Gere out of Pretty Woman. I had more hair back then, and I kind of might have looked like him, might not have.
Okay.
That's my logic, and I'm sticking to it. I can say what I want. If you don't have photos to prove otherwise. And yeah, then from there, I decided, I was talking with you and started doing a little bit of consulting work outside of that, doing a bit of work for myself, and that progressed and grew from there. And then from there, did a number of different roles within clients. Was CEO of a charity that was set up to help prevent family violence. So I did that for a little bit of time, also while having my own consultancy firm and a couple of other businesses as well. So that's in a nutshell. There's a bit more to it, but that's the nutshell.
So where in your journey, because you have a whole bunch of things on the resume there that you briefly went into, but so life is easy, right? When did this principle start to develop? Because I think most people would disagree with you. I think most people are like, life is hard. There's a lot that go, whether it's paying bills, relationships, getting that, not being fat, doing that. Like there's so many things that are just very difficult for people to do. Where did this mantra come from? And I'm not sure if it's actually your mantra, but I know that's how what we've talked about a few times.
Yeah, I think it's because I'm generally a lazy person, and they say innovation is created by lazy people looking for a better way of doing things. And for me, it was always a case of I'm very busy. I do like being busy, so I'm saying lazy facetiously, but I don't like repetitive things. I don't like doing things the same. If it can be done faster, quicker, easier, I want to do it that way. It just really annoys me if I have to do something in a repetitive way. Well, it did then. Now, a little bit different. I'll talk about my Forrest Gump moment later. But and so I was always looking for, how do I do this? This is frustrating me. Can I do it better? Can I do it easier? Can I do it faster? And I think as a result of that, this desire to well, I'd say it was a hatred of doing repetitive things, forced me to look for ways of doing things faster and easier. And then in that process, I started to look for how to do things. I started to find that there are key principles for doing things, and if you just did those key principles and avoid the other ones. And Charlie Munger talks about this, Warren Buffett's business partner. He talks about isolating the things that, when he was younger, he worked in the Air Force, and his job was to do the weather. And what he worked out was, he said, well, what I'll do is I'll work out what's likely to, if I was to do it, what would kill the pilots, and then not do that. That was his philosophy. So he'd work out, these are the things, if I did that, it's likely to kill the pilots. So he just made sure he didn't do that.
Do the opposite.
And that's where, exactly. Well, yeah, just do not do those kind of things. And you look at that with, you mentioned relationships being difficult. From a relationship perspective, one thing from my perspective, I mean, I've had some troubled relationships in the past. And when I looked at those relationships, honestly looked at them, the relationships were troubled to start with. And as a friend once put to me, they said to me that the best version you're going to get of that person is when you first meet them. So if things are difficult at the beginning, it's likely to get worse. How many people get into a relationship, know this person there, and they're going, oh, they'll get better. They'll get that. What you've got at the start is the absolute best that you're going to get. And this is where we talk about things being simple. Relationships in that regard are simple. One from, and I have a statement, I didn't learn this until much later in life, but the statement I say is, no amount of skill is going to fix a poor partner choice. And that's not saying the person is a bad person. It's just that you two don't gel. So if you don't gel, no amount of skill is going to fix that. And I know that from, from my relationships and a number of people that I've worked with in that regard. You can't fix something that doesn't fit together. If you're an imperial cog and they're a metric, then you're never going to gel together. It's easier just to go, look, you're a lovely person, but we're not going to work, and move on to find someone that you gel with if you have that foundation. And I have that with friends of mine as well, who, I mean, some of my friends were arranged marriages. They didn't know each other at the start, but what was interesting about understanding the dynamic that went behind that was their parents were about finding a good culture fit, a good values fit. They looked at the values of the other parents and said, okay, does that align with our values? So they had these core fundamentals that connected, and that's what's kept them through. And they're in 50-year marriage. So that's how long that has lasted, where they didn't know it, they'd never met each other, but they had core fundamental values. So when we talk about life being easy, when you identify what are the key fundamental things that work, a close friend of mine, similar sort of thing with relationships, he told me when I was going through a particularly bad breakup, we're talking about this, and he goes, yeah, when I was younger, I had a criteria, and this was his rule. He said, I had a criteria of what I wanted. If the person didn't meet 80% of that criteria, I just stopped dating him immediately and moved on. And he's in, him and his wife have been married, I don't know, 25 years.
What would
from what I can tell, it seems.
And not to interrupt that, because I think that's a really, I love the idea, because I'm very analytical in that way. I'm like, okay, like I have these are the thing, my non-negotiables, these are the criteria I have, and but I feel like that could be overcome very easily by a lot of people who just want to be with, they would rather be with someone than be alone. So they're willing to compromise who they are in order to not be alone. So is that something that, and I know we're not the relationship gurus here, so I don't want to go too far on a tangent, but this kind of goes to a broader thing of the mindset itself, is how do you, if those are the keys, if that is a key, right? Having standards, sticking to your standards, then how do people go from appeasing and compromising to sticking to their standards? And this can go for almost anything, not necessarily relationships. So how do they make that transition?
Yeah, and that's the other part of that. No amount of skill fixes a poor partner choice. That's the assumption that you're a good partner first. And that's a hard thing for us to face. That, you know, I know there's problems I had in relationships that, if I'm going to be honest about it, were my fault. I caused it. You know, and it's part of that, recognizing that you play a key role in this. There's two people in a relationship, and you're 50% of that.
Mm-hmm.
And friends of mine who are marriage coaches, and they rescue marriages, you know, and that's their role. But what they talk about in their mantra is that you're not a person, you don't have marriage problems. You're two people with problems that you're bringing to a marriage. So if you've got that, you know, I don't want to be alone, and that's your motivation, then yes, you are going to compromise, end up in a, you know, most likely you have a high probability that you can end up in a difficult situation anyway, and probably break up and then be, you know, go through this cycle, where it's better to take the time, fix yourself. If you're okay with you, if you're happy with you, again, we're talking about principles here. If you're happy with you and you're bringing the best of you to a relationship, then the chances are, one, you're not going to compromise on accepting, you know, being treated in a bad way anyway. That doesn't mean you stand up and go, hey, you know, how dare you treat me that way? You don't worry about that. You don't waste your energy on that. It's like, if someone treats you badly, just walk away. You know, I deal with that all the time now, and it's amazing how many people I don't have in my life that treat me badly. I literally don't have people in my life that treat me badly, because as soon as I sense something, I just walk away and don't even get into the state where we're having an argument. And then that applies with both personal and business. So in business relationships, a very similar principle applies. And it's just as critical, because it can be very financially costly to enter into a relationship, a business relationship, with someone that might rip you off. How many people have you heard of that have been ripped off in business because the relationship wasn't there? And this is where it's really critical to pay attention to that, to, one, know who you are, be comfortable with that. Then you have your criteria, and with the criteria, to be said, criteria is not, you know, this person looks this way. That's a facade. You know, all the people that I know that are in successful relationships, long-term relationships, they look at the character of the person. To them, that person is the most beautiful person in the world. They connect on character. And that's what makes it work. If you're focused on and because things can change, you might be with someone and you know, they're a star athlete, and then they break their leg, or, you know, they have some injury. What do you go say? Oh, piss off because you don't fit that criteria? Some people,
you're not an athlete anymore. It's one of the top. It's one of the top 5. You have to be a current athlete. You can't.
Yeah. So your criteria needs to be more about character and those kind of things that work with you. And the other third component, so it's the criteria for the other person, which is based on character. The third is you being okay, which is probably the first part. And the third one is, in any relationship, if you spend more time listening than you do talking or demanding things, taking time to understand the other person's intention, you'll have much better communication. A lot of times, you know, we argue about things, and from my experience, you know, someone would say something, I'd get offended, I'd argue back, but I really hadn't taken the time to listen to what the other person was. And even just that point of listening, I was reading about Nelson Mandela, and his dad was head of the tribe that he grew up with, and whenever they had a meeting, he would go around the room first, let everyone else talk before he said anything. And I was watching it recently, Barack Obama, apparently because they were talking about him and Putin, and because of what's going on with Russia and that at the moment, but they were saying when Barack Obama met Putin, he literally sat for 55 minutes. Imagine that, 55 minutes, did not say a word, just let Putin talk, just listened. So imagine, you know, how different your relationships would be if you spent more time listening. Because think about it. How many times are you in a conversation with something and you're thinking about what you're going to say next, not really thinking about what that person has said, let alone processing what it means? Bring that to a relationship, and you have much more successful relationships, much easier.
Oh yeah, and you see it anywhere. You see, it's perfectly. You see it everywhere that like most people aren't listening. That they are just they're trying to formulate a response very quickly, so that they are like for whatever reason, we just want to be able to respond. Maybe it's defending our ideas or our opinions, but like we're always on the attack. We're very, very seldom like just sitting back and just active listening to figure out what's actually happening. So just to summarize the three principles of life that you have is one, not in any specific order, but one is listen more. Relationships, sorry. 3 keys in relationships is 1, be okay with yourself. Be okay with you. 2,
gotta like yourself.
Gotta like, okay, perfect. Gotta like yourself. What was, so the third one's listen more. What was the second one? What was the
You
second
have
one?
a criteria for what works for you and your
Criteria.
partner.
Got it. Criteria.
Yeah, but
okay,
again,
so
that criteria needs to be more about character than it does about, physical appearance
deep
or
criteria.
social status. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So when we talk about life being easy, so the people that I know people, lots of people have been married a long time, and you can tell when people say, oh yeah, but you don't know what's going to be behind closed doors. I've heard that before. And it's like, are you really paying attention? Because when you see a couple in their 60s that walk into a party holding hands, still, or when they're walking down the street, they're holding hands, or they're giving each other a big hug and stuff like that. Not because anyone's watching or anything like that, but you watch them, they're still in love. There's signs that when you see other couples where one's walking further ahead of the other. Well, that doesn't mean they've got issues, but it's
I can't help that they're slower than me. I have to walk at a certain pace.
Exactly. Sometimes that happens. I have that problem. I'm 6 foot and walk fast, so I have to slow down with a lot of people.
That's fine. Right. So I guess my thing would be, okay, so those are really good principles. I love those. So I do appreciate you sharing those. I think that the biggest thing on there is the being okay with you. I think that is where I find that most people, because you said like, it's not that you have a marriage problem. It's that you are bringing, I think that's like so powerful that you are bringing problems to the marriage. I think that is so powerful that people, if you reverse that, it's like, well, we're just not good, compatible. It's like, no, like you each have brought problems that you need to reconcile to the marriage. The marriage itself is fine, but you two are not necessarily compatible, or you need to work on something externally or internally. So I guess my question is, how does someone who's not okay with themselves, how do they become okay with themselves? And like, where did that even start? Like, why am I not okay with myself? Like, how does that happen?
That's a great question. And it's really in depth and you can spend, 20 years in therapy going through that. And some people do. I'm an advocate. You don't need to do that. When you understand how your beliefs work, your beliefs are just a thought that you've repeated over and over again. Now, you may or may not have been aware of that. So from a very young age, you might have had your parent tell you you're shit and you can't, you're hopeless at doing stuff and things like that. And apologize if that's an expletive that you can't say on the podcast, but you can either beep it out or I promise no F-bombs. So
it's all good. It's all good.
But yeah, so we think our beliefs are real. Many times, that's a process that we have, and we go, oh, this is real. And what we also don't understand is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You have within your brain called your reticular activating system, and if you take your little finger and go down to your second knuckle, if that's your second knuckle first, whichever depends from the top of your finger down to your second knuckle, it's that big. It's near the back of your spine. Well, I'm not a biologist, but that's what I've read. It's a very small part. But that filters. So have you ever had the experience where you've been looking for something, you're looking all through the house, ridiculous places like the washing basket and the freezer and stuff like that, and then you find it was sitting on the bench and you've walked past it many times?
Yes.
You've had that experience? Yeah.
Every day. I mean.
Yeah. And so this is where that's part of, if you pay attention to your thinking process, what you're saying is, I can't find this thing. And that's filtering, you're setting your reticular activating system to filter and block that out from your mind. And that's how our beliefs work. So it becomes a cycle where we go, okay, I'm a shit person. Well, take spelling, for example. Let's say you're a bad speller. And you say, I'm a bad speller. And then you will find constant examples where you get words wrong because your reticular activating system notices that, because that's the filter you've set. Through your beliefs, you've set that filter, and it becomes a reinforcing process. And that's how that works. You've repeated it enough from when you were younger to create the belief, because a belief is just a thought you've repeated over and over again. It's set the filter, so then you now reinforce it over and over again. And that's where people spend a lot of time going through psychology to try and understand where it all came from, so they can understand it and reverse it. But when you understand the principle of how belief is formed, and I've got an article on this on my LinkedIn about, you don't have to understand why. You don't need to understand why. You just need to know what you choose. And I use the word choose specifically. A lot of times when you ask people, and I had this, I was asking people, what do you want? They go, I don't know what I want. And so I kind of got frustrated with that question. So let's come up with a better way of doing this. And I thought, well, what about choose? And when I ask people, what do you choose? All of a sudden the light bulb went off and go, I've got a choice. And it's right, you do have a choice. And so from that perspective, you can shortcut the whole psychology process by just saying, I'm going to be confident, or I'm going to be a good speller. And after you repeat that, it takes a little while initially because you've got to undo that. But if you just continue to repeat that, so this comes back to liking yourself. And I did this with my son. My son was a social experiment for me, but from a young age.
Don't tell him.
He knows. And but it was from a very young age. I just said, do you like yourself? I asked him, do you like yourself? It's important to like yourself. And he's to the point now, he's 14, but he just likes himself. He doesn't need things. He doesn't, he does his thing. He organizes himself extremely well. And this is where that positive reinforcement works. If you haven't got it, if you haven't had it, you can, it's okay if you want to wallow in it. That's your choice. You have that choice. An alternative is you can just say, I want something different. I'm choosing to like myself, and I'm going to do that, say that over and over again until it starts to sink in, which is what I did. Because I didn't, when I was younger, for whatever reason, I don't know, I didn't go through it. I don't care. I don't need to know. I just decided I'm going to like myself. I told myself I like myself. Now I think I'm freaking awesome. And that's literally my life now. Everything is awesome. Literally Lego movie.
What if you what if you don't believe it though? So I had someone on the show a little while ago, and like the idea of like, okay, like it's almost like a positive affirmation. And it's like, okay, if you want to make $1 million, you just tell yourself, okay, like I'm a millionaire, I'm a millionaire, I'm a millionaire, or I have money, or money flows to me, but you don't believe what you're saying. So if you already feel that you're not enough, or you're not good at this, or whatever stuck with you since you were a kid, and however that formed, and now you're 25, 30, 35 years old, whatever it is, and now you're trying to kind of reverse the cycle after years and years of doing it certain ways. What if you don't believe it? Like, what if you truly believe, like, no, I'm really a bad writer, and I'm not going to be a good writer? How do you make that? Because a lot of people are hearing what you're saying. It's like, yeah, but I actually am bad at this, or like, oh, I don't believe that just saying these words are going to help me. Like, that's where the kind of the woo-woo eye rolls come in my field. So how do you get people to see progress towards that, and actually maybe even like, do you have to, number one, do you have to believe it? Just even if you say it every single day. If I say that, like, I am a good athlete every single day, right? And it, like, even if I don't necessarily believe that, will I start to believe it because I keep saying it? Like, do I need anything else? I guess, is there more to it than just saying something like that?
Yeah, it's a really great question that you've asked, because you get the eye rolls and things like that. And it's kind of like, people go, I don't believe it. And the thing with principles is that they're kind of like universal laws. They exist whether you believe them or not. It's kind of like if you stepped off a balcony, what's going to happen? You're going to fall down. Whether you believe it or not.
Yeah,
you can believe. Yes. You can believe it's whether you believe it or not, it's going to happen. And yes, there are people, but what you've said is it comes back to that process of what you believe is true for you, because that's what beliefs are. They don't have any. A belief doesn't have any basis behind it. Otherwise, it's a fact. It's a belief. A fact is something you can evidence. Whereas a belief does not have any support behind it, and it's something you choose. And we know, and I mean, depending on which book you want to choose from, you can even go back to the Bible, where it talks about as you think, so you shall be, some words to that effect. I mean, that's a 2,000-year-old book that has it in it. So many books talk about this principle of what you think, that's what your life is going to be. So whether you believe it or not, doesn't really matter. It's like whether you believe gravity exists or not. It's not going to matter. The principle applies. And this is where, as you say, and the people say, oh, I don't believe it, and because it doesn't work for me. You're just proving the point. You don't believe it, and that's why it doesn't work for you, because you don't believe it's true. But it is for some people, that's where they're at, and they're going to stay that way until they want to do something different. And that's part of what we talk about with one of my organizations, the foundation I have called Share.care. The first principle is personal responsibility. We have 10 principles to abide by, and one of them's the first one is personal responsibility. You have to take responsibility that your life is yours, and how it turns out. There are, obviously there's extreme ends to it. If you look at any bell curve, there's always extreme ends, and things sometimes happen at it. But your ability to choose how you respond to things is entirely up to you.
Yeah.
Stuff happens sometimes, and I've had lots of stuff happen. And that's where I take that a step further, because people talk about positive and negative, and I'm rewriting that. I use Shakespeare as a draw. What Shakespeare wrote in Hamlet: nothing is good or bad, thinking makes it so. So, and this is where again the shortcut. For there to be a positive, there must be a negative. So if something bad happens, you have to work what the bad is, try and find out, what is the good in this, and that's a longer process. If you just say it's an event, what's good for me?
What's the law of polarity? Isn't that the law of polarity?
No, it's completely neutral. So it's saying it's neutral.
And yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's what I mean. The law of polarity is nothing is good nor bad. It just is. And we make it good or bad by our beliefs. Yeah. So,
correct.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Sorry. Yeah. Exactly that principle. It's there. It's so I don't even think about things being good or bad. It's an event. Because when something happens, how do I use this to get where I want to go? The presumption to that question being that you have a direction, you have a goal. I have a whole workshop on that. If you go to my website, damianandrews.com, you can get the free downloadable workshop that shows you how to set goals, talks about how your reticular activating system works, and how to set things up so you actually attract the goals rather than having to work hard towards them.
So if I'm someone who name the thing that you currently suck at, and insert what you suck at here. I'm overweight, I'm fat, I have no muscle, I don't look good, I'm horrible at relationships, my boss hates me, I hate my whatever it is. If you just reframe your thoughts, and even if you don't necessarily believe it, but every single day you repeat, if you are, let's just say you're out of shape, like, no, I'm gonna be in shape, or I am in shape. And then, or you start saying, I'm very valuable to this company, or you start saying, I'm actually a very good partner, or whatever it might be. If you start rephrasing the negative self-doubt, not being okay with yourself thoughts into more so positive thoughts, that will activate these parts of the brain, which will then, as you repeat them over and over again, you will start to see kind of small microscopic things of progress. And then it might cause you to take action in a different way. It might cause you to start thinking in a different way, but it all starts with reframing those minimal thoughts, those negative thoughts into positive ones. And then eventually down the line, it should yield you a specific result.
Yeah, and they've actually proven that it works as well from the perspective, and it's not Tom Brady, it's not football, it's in basketball. And what they did was they took three groups of people and they had, you remember the study?
Yeah, I think exactly so.
Yeah. So they had three groups of people. One group, they tested everybody and went, okay, this is their skill level. Then they took one group aside and they practiced shooting baskets. The other group, they took aside and did nothing. They just sat there, didn't do anything. And the third group, they took aside and they drilled practice into them, but without actually doing anything. So they didn't use a ball. They just exactly visualized that they were shooting baskets. Then when they tested them, the people that practiced obviously improved. The people that didn't practice stayed the same. But the interesting thing was the people that didn't practice but visualized it almost improved to the same extent that the people practiced.
Oh, is that crazy?
And that's a significant improvement. And that was just because they thought about it. And this is why, you look about how if you study, when I say study, I'm not talking about in-depth study, but you read anything about where you talk about superstar athletes and things like that, where they go into, before a ball game or whatever game they're playing, they visualize how this is going to be. They work through that process to see how it's going to turn out, how they want it to turn out. And the people that actually do that more clearly achieve are more likely to achieve the results. And we do this too, like the negotiation program that I run called Negotiation Magic. We go through this process because it's not about, successful negotiation is not so much about skill. It's not about education. It's more about your personal development and your ability to do this well in your mind first, that you can turn up. We talk about sources of power in negotiation. One of your key sources of power is your own personal belief in yourself. And that's something you create. Confidence is not something, you don't go into a shop and buy confidence. People think, I've got to do that in practice and get confidence. It doesn't work that way. You can just be confident in your mind and you'll behave that way. And that's something we drill into in a lot of detail in the Negotiation Magic program that we run, because it's so important to have that mindset right before you walk in, that you are the powerhouse, and it stands out. People notice that. That's what and he's a 7th Dan black belt, and he works with a lot of troubled youth or even troubled adults, both victims and perpetrators. But one of the things he teaches, especially for victims, is, and we know this, is that when you walk more confidently, you're less likely to be a victim, because you project something that scares off potential, because a perpetrator is looking for the easy target. It's you just walking confidently because you feel confident, and that's a choice. I mean, you do that now, and for the listeners as well, if you're watching. But I mean, hunch your shoulders over, look down, close yourself over. I mean, and feel how your body feels. It doesn't feel great. Sit up straight. Put your butt or your fanny in America in the back of the chair. Sit up straight. And how different do you feel? And it was just changing. You didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to think about anything. You just moved slightly. But the same token too, if you think about it, it comes forward, because again, it's one of those universal principles. It's true whether you believe it or not, as Ripley once said.
I love that. I love that that study they did with the basketball players, because it does show, like, it's like, if the more you visualize your own success, visualize the outcome of something, like, that's gonna help. It's gonna help. You don't actually have to be doing something, which is really incredible for athletes too, because that's something they probably don't do enough of in actual athletics. But so it kind of it brings me down the road. Oh yeah.
I was going to say, the other part that adds to that, which we don't really fully appreciate, and I think you alluded to this in the introduction, is that there's a difference between conscious understanding and unconscious action. Which was, because we've all had that experience where we've thought we've understood something, we've gone and done it and messed it up, or didn't do anywhere as near as we thought we were capable of. And we've had the opposite of experience of where, you haven't thought you've understood it, but you've surprised yourself with how well you've done it. And because there is a very big difference between consciously understanding something and being able to do it. Action is an unconscious function. I mean, when you think about it, if you're picking up a cup off the table, you're not thinking through all the different muscles that work to make that happen. But there's so many, there's literally hundreds of muscles in your arm and your fingers that are working to pick up that. You can't consciously think of that. The same thing happens, and this is where this principle works, is there are so many factors outside of your conscious awareness. So if you're playing a game, or if you for example, investing, or whatever you're looking at doing, there's so many factors, so much input, so much information coming in that you can't consciously understand it. Yet unconsciously, if you've trained your mind that way, you believe it, which sets your reticular activating system, all of a sudden your unconscious mind is opening to receive that information, and you become aware of things that you didn't even know you were there, but they are right there in front of you, because your filter is now open to that.
Is that the thing that comes to mind most often when you say, like, once you start, you keep saying it's
reticular activating system, RAS.
Reticular activate. I'm gonna get that wrong, but reticular activating system.
Yeah. RAS is easier.
RAS. RAS. Okay. Reticular activating system. Yeah. So RAS. So is that similar to, I buy a motorcycle, right? Very specific brand of motorcycle or car, doesn't really matter. I buy something. And because I didn't see, like, the second you buy something, you see the whole road is filled with it. Is that a very 100%. Similar, like, once you do
exactly
something?
That's yeah.
Okay, because I didn't see it before.
Yeah, exactly. And what you're doing there is you're doing it retrospectively. So like you say, the vehicle was there always. You just didn't notice it because it wasn't relevant to you. And this is what the reticular activating RAS does, is it makes makes things relevant to you. It only allows you to see what's relevant to you. And this is where that affirmation initially, yeah, it doesn't work because you're still programmed to think, I'm shit. I can't spell or whatever it is. And that's what you haven't changed that filter yet. And that's where you need to learn at unconscious level. And this where, someone referred to it as solitude, but it's having a peaceful mind. So a lot of times you'll see people where, they're constantly listening to music, and not just music, but music with lyrics in it. And not saying shouldn't do that. Music's fun, it's entertaining. You should do that. But having time where you have trained yourself to quieten your mind. When your mind is quiet, you can talk to your unconscious more. You can program it much faster. If your mind is not quiet, you little chance of doing that. And that's why change is hard for a lot of people. And this is why kids learn faster, not because they should. Adults should learn faster because you've got more experience to draw upon. I remember when I got my motorbike license many years ago, but the instructor talked about that very thing where they said, well, I can tell you motorbike riding is dangerous. And the reality is older people have more chance of surviving simply because they have more experience in life. They will be more aware of, most of them have driven before. They're aware of the road and things like that. Whereas a younger person doesn't have that experience. They don't have that at an unconscious level. And then they're more likely to make mistakes. So older people should learn faster, but where we don't learn faster is we shut off this ability to learn because we know. When you ask a child something, or you say to a child, if you go out and to look in the lawn there, if you have a look, everything's alive. They'll become inquisitive and go, "Oh, is it? Wow, what is it? What?" And they'll start asking questions. Yeah. Whereas you say that to an adult, and they'll go, "I don't care," or "No, it's not," or they'll immediately shut it down, and that's shutting down that learning process, which comes back to this whole learning at an unconscious level. And having that belief, people, as you say, people have a belief, it doesn't work. They've completely shut it down, and comes back to what I talked about, that third principle in relationship is listening. How often are we actually listening to new information? We've already made a judgment, said, no, it doesn't work. And therefore we don't learn.
I love that. So just, and I want to summarize what you said before, because I think it's super powerful. And I think that people really need to hone in on this specific message. Is you basically, and what you said earlier was you have conscious and you have unconscious almost thinking. The conscious is knowing. Like you can consciously think of things, things, and it's the unconscious that causes you to act. And so I guess my question when you break that down to those two very specific parts is, how do I create an unconscious, or how do I create by creating the positive affirmation in what we talked about earlier, that creates a new, that's the knowing, which then creates a new acting mechanism in the unconscious. So you need to be able to go to your conscious. Okay, I'm going to rewire my brain to go to the unconscious, but you can't rewire anything unless you're in the unconscious mind. Is that kind of where?
Yeah, well, you don't have to be in the unconscious mind, and I just want to clarify that, because words, how we use words, is very important. Affects us a lot. Like, I mean, you've had the experience of it. I'm sure you have, where you've said, "Oh, I don't want to forget this," and then you've forgotten it. I think most people have had that experience. Yeah. What would happen if you said, "I want to remember this"? Now, slight change, very slight change, but massive difference in how that it affects what happens for you. And because this is how your mind works. And that's the other thing. Your unconscious mind doesn't know how to not do something. It needs to do it. So not doesn't mean anything to your unconscious mind. And the way this works is, if I told you, don't think of a pink elephant, you have to think of a pink elephant to know what to reference, to know what to not think about. And this is where you really need to be careful. That's why a lot of people struggle quitting smoking. Quitting smoking is easy. Talk about being healthy. But most people that struggle, if you pay attention, to people when they're talking about difficulty of smoking, you'll notice that I want to quit smoking. I want to stop smoking. They're thinking about smoking. Regardless of what you say, stop, don't, all that in front of it doesn't matter. They're thinking about smoking. I've smoked a number of times in my life, and I was always able to quit whenever I wanted, because I just said, I'm going to breathe clean air.
That's powerful.
Simple as that. Yeah, this is the thing. That's why I'm saying life is pretty simple. If you do the right thing, whereas if you do the wrong thing, if I had said, I want to stop smoking, I don't want to smoke, and my mum smokes, she continues to smoke. She continues to say, I want to stop smoking. And I've said to her many times, Mum, just say you want to breathe clear there. But she doesn't want to. She gets some sort of benefit from doing it. Whatever, I haven't got into it with her. It's, that's her thing, and I'm busy doing other things. She's my mum. I love her, and she wants to smoke. That's her choice. But this is where we can make it simple for ourselves. We set it up to be simple because the principles are there. Say, I want to breathe clean air. If you say that enough, all of a sudden putting that cigarette in your mouth is going to be really difficult. It's like procrastination. Procrastination doesn't exist in my mind. In the world that I teach, because I saw the frown there.
Like,
you're
really?
Going, what do you mean? Really?
Elaborate.
Think about it, but think about this, right? In any given moment, you're doing really what you want to be doing in that moment. So if you're binge watching Netflix, I can guarantee if you pay attention, and I do that too. There's times where there's certain shows that I like watching, and can't wait for the new Star Trek series. Yes, I'm a geek, and I'm king of geeks, and I'm proud of that. But what you're doing in that moment, if you pay attention to your thoughts, I can guarantee you're not thinking about your goals, or some other thing that you want to achieve. You're thinking, I want to watch this show. So you're doing exactly what you want to be doing in that moment. You're not procrastinating at all. You're doing exactly what you want to do, what's most important to you in that moment. So in any given moment, whatever you're doing is what's most important to you in that moment. It's quite easy to change, to stop, procrastination, if you want to use that term, but it's just, you do that next time you're binge watching Netflix, be watching and going and start thinking about, I want to, whatever, I want to be a star athlete, or whatever it is that I want to finish this book, whatever the goal is. Start thinking about, just have that going in your mind, and just see how much you stay watching that. It becomes juxtapositioned in your mind. All of a sudden, what you're doing is not congruent with what you're thinking. This enjoyment of watching the TV starts to disappear because you stop producing the dopamine. You've got to use the chemicals to your advantage, dopamine and serotonin. That's why video games are so addictive. They are set up to do that, but you can do that yourself to make yourself addicted to whatever you want to be addicted to. And this is not new too. We talked about this before, and I don't think they understood the chemicals behind it. But think about, there was a really famous movie from 1937. It was the first feature-length animated movie, Snow White. Now, had a difficult job to do. What did she do? She said, whistle while you work. Or she sung whistle while you work. And that process, which I don't think they understood then, but that process, because it was also in Mary Poppins in 1968. She said, with every job that must be done, there's an element of fun. Find the fun and snap. The job's a game. Why is it a game? Because when you find the fun in it, your body's producing dopamine, which means you're enjoying it. And I had that from a practical example. It was years ago, and I didn't realize this at the time, but I used to always try and find, how can I make this fun? Because again, if I didn't want to be doing something, at least I wanted to enjoy it.
Yeah.
And one job I was doing, and I had like all these spreadsheets to work through and sort out. And basically, when they did the data dump, the spreadsheet, the columns didn't align. So the rows and the columns weren't aligned. So it all had to be aligned. Yeah, exactly. And I had to sort through that. Yeah. And I went, well, how can I do this? So I made it a game to find how many different ways I could sort this to make it, quicker and faster. And I actually made it fun, and people were coming watching, going, what are you doing? Because it's like I was making it fun. But what was making it fun was and people, this is another thing people don't realize with dopamine. It's not just doing the thing that makes your body produce dopamine. Thinking it makes your body produce dopamine. As soon as you start thinking a happy thought, your body starts producing a little bit of dopamine. If you focus on that happy thought and expand that as a thought, all of a sudden your body produces more dopamine and you feel happy. That's why gratitude works, because when you're grateful, you're thinking about things you like, your body's producing dopamine. It's just a thought. People don't realize that dopamine is produced by actions, yes, but also two, it's produced by thought. So you can actually just make yourself happy by thinking happy. Hence, whistle while you work.
I love that. And they didn't understand the science behind it back then, but it's still there. So
It's still there.
something we talked about prior to coming on today, and I'm gonna hammer away before we finish up, is a lot of people listening, okay? And I'm gonna stick to like one or two topics to make, because I can go on for many topics and get the advice, but life is easy, right? And your whole, making money is easy, being rich is easy. Okay, so I'm gonna hammer. Yep. How does someone who is not rich or not making money go from that to physically, like, to actually making money? How does someone what's the secret? Yeah. What are your secrets? I think you talked about your four life principles earlier in the
around
show.
Money, yeah. Around money, there's four principles, but the first one is, firstly, you've got to be ready for it. And I've made and lost money multiple times. Your mind has a thermostat. I use it as a thermostat. So wherever you see yourself, and you've heard of self-sabotage before. The opposite of that is if you don't make enough money to do what you're doing, you work that little bit harder to get here. The thing is, people don't realize if you move up to here and you don't believe you're worth that, you'll self-sabotage and go back. And there's multiple literature on that you can read about. Even most people have heard of Tony Robbins. He talks about how he did that. He moved out of this space where he thought making this money would be great. He made all this money, tried to help people. Then they didn't like him because he was helping them, because they felt, and so he actually sabotaged. He talks about that. And there's numerous people that talk about that. So the first one is, obviously, and this is not a principle, but you've got to you'll be at wherever you think.
Be ready for the money when it comes.
Yeah. But as far as, the key principles and how, making money is easy. The first part is, whether you're in a business or an employment role, is adding value. Rather than saying, a lot of people focus on, what are you going to pay me? When am I going to get my bonus? What's my benefits? All that kind of stuff. Very few people say, well, what's the extra value I can add? And the thing is, what's most interesting about that, if you focus on value you can add, one, you'll be in a very rare category. So you have very little competition as far as employment opportunities. If you go into an employment saying, I can add this value, this value, this value, this is what I'm going to do to make your business better. Or, as a business owner with your clients, saying, we can do these extra things for you, little extras, things like that. What people don't realize, and the study on this, I can't remember what the study was called, but it was, they studied, the difference between working hours and pay, and they found that a person working an extra hour a week, that's not hard, an hour a week, actually resulted in a 40% pay increase over the person that didn't work that extra hour a week.
40%?
Yeah. So that's the thing, that's where because so many people don't do it, you put yourself in such a unique category where you add value. So this is where, when it's a massive difference, because think about it. When you look at, in places you've worked on, how many people did you work with? Can you honestly say focused on adding extra value? Adding, providing value to the employee, or just were there, do their job, have their break when they had their break, and did the full break, and then went back to work, did what they needed to do just to get by, and then went home on time. And so I'm not suggesting that you need to work really hard. You don't. This is where, if you're efficient in what you can do, I got in trouble when I first started working in corporate, because I was really efficient in what I did. I got in there and I worked out how to do it, and I did it. Something got into my intro, I did it straight away. And this is another program that I run called, it's part of my exceptional effort program called Max Time. It's a module to do with time management. Really, it's about what I call ROE, return on effort. You're finding where you get the maximum return on your effort. And so I did that it wasn't part of the program then, but many, many years ago. And so as soon as something went in my tray, I did it straight away and did that. And I think about a month later, I got called into the office and said, Damian, we want to have a chat to you about, you don't seem to be doing much work. And I was like, what? I'm seeing something I'm getting done. And so we had this discussion, and it all turned out, kind of okay. But the first thing I did after walking to that office, I went and grabbed a whole bunch of scrap paper, chucked it in my in tray and left it there. So, and then I was walking around the office going, oh man, I'm so stressed. I'm so busy. Because it was just like, that was that office dynamic. But, what you can do is you can find ways of doing things that little bit more efficiently. And so you'll get paid significantly more. It's not a direct relationship to more hours equals the same percentage of increased pay. It actually substantially more. But the key, add more value, and you'll be in a very, very unique position. So whether it's business or an employee. As far as, so that's earning money. There's only one principle: earning money. Add value.
Add value. That's the goal to get rich. That's like that's what you told me you wouldn't like.
No, that's to earn money. To earn money.
Got it.
So there's three keys to wealth. And these are, there was a number of books, but probably one of the most famous. It's nearly 100 years old now. It was written in 1928. George S. Carlson's The Richest Man in Babylon.
Okay.
And so a lot of people know this book. It's not like it hasn't been around. It's not like, this is the thing we come back to, we talked about before, between knowing and not knowing. Today, we are a couple of mouse clicks away from any information that you need to do anything. So it's not like the information is not there. The information is there. We just need to do it. We need to implement it, and it needs to be part of what we're doing. And this is, again, the principles for wealth. And I think we need to overcomplicate it to justify that it's real, and go, it's because I'm not sure why that is, but I think partly because it's the effort and return, risk and reward, which is not true. I manage one of the companies I manage is a private equity fund. We get substantial returns every year on year, and very little risk, almost no risk. So coming back to that, the three principles is one, keep part of what you earn, which is in George S. Carlson's book.
Say that again.
So keep part of what you earn.
Keep part of what you earn. Okay.
Exactly. And then they say save 10% is the general rule. Save 10%. That's not a hard rule, is it? As in principle. And how many times when you look at it, people go, you say save 10%, but they'll go out and they'll drink and smoke and gamble, do those three things. If you're gambling, pretty much chances are you're never going to be wealthy while you're gambling, because your mentality is wrong. Because if you're gambling, you'll think you're going to get a positive, unless you love throwing away money. That's fun for you, which I don't know anyone that is.
But I can name a few people.
Yeah, but for the mentality is, I'm going to get a win. But if you understand probabilities, you'll know that it's stacked against you. Over time, you will lose money. That's almost a certainty. Mm-hmm. And even the people that do win the big lottery, most of them come back to that first point about mindset. It's gone within a couple of years anyway, because they don't have the mindset. So gambling is and I've never really been much of it, because I think I understood the principle behind it, and I thought I don't like throwing away money. This thing that I might win one day compared to all the money I'm going to spend to do that, it just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
And so this is where you can save money. That's not the point, not a problem. The second principle is to invest that money. And then the third one is to reinvest that money.
What does investing mean?
So, and this is okay. So, and this is where we go, okay, now we're getting to the nitty gritty of how to do that. First, you've got to get the principles. If put this way, if you can't save 10% of your income and put that away, first thing you do, put that away, never touch it, then you'll never be wealthy, because you'll get to a certain point, go, actually, I want to go on a holiday, and then you'll spend that. And this is where Warren Buffett talks about it. And Einstein said the eighth wonder of the world is compound interest. We take it out too early. We take this out too early, and then we want to have it now. And we really, there's a famous story. It's a fable, but it possibly has some foundation to it, where a famous, this old chess player was wandering through a kingdom, and the king thought he was the best chess player in the world, and so they had a bet, and he said, well, I can't remember. It's like if the old guy lost, he was executed. But if the old guy won, the king had to put a grain of gold on the first chessboard square, and then 2 grains, then 4 grains, and it had to double each time until it got to the end. And I actually did this calculation of what that compounding does. I can't remember what the number was, but it was astronomical. The kingdom ran out of gold before they could do it, so the king executed him anyway. But the principle is this compounding point. It at first it doesn't seem like much is happening, and then all of a sudden it grows out of. The reason Warren Buffett's company makes so much money now is it continued to reinvest in the early days, and now it's just astronomical, and it will never ever run out. It'll just keep growing and growing and growing. So as far as investing, again, principles are pretty straightforward. Warren Buffett talks about it with shares, and very few people do it. It's not hard. And this is the equity fund that I run. We that's what we focus on. We just find undervalued stocks. We focus only on top quality companies. Don't look for speckies. Don't even look at them. I'm not wasting my time. It's it. I'm lazy. I'm not looking for these, things. I'm looking for a sure return. My dad had a great stock buying principle where he would take. He would only look at stocks that paid a dividend, and then he would compare. He'd say, "Okay, what's the current bond yield?" He'd add 2% of the to that bond yield. So just say the current bond yield was 1%. It was a different time back then; interest rates were higher, but arbitrary figures here. So let's say bond yield is 3%. So he'd add 2%, so 5%. Whenever one of the companies on his list, which were strong companies that paid consistent dividends, dropped below 5%. The dividend yield went above 5%, whichever way you want to look at it. He purchased that stock. So as the value went down, the dividend yield goes up because it's still paying consistent dividends. Stocks fluctuate. He would just buy it on the dip. And based on that criteria, he made a fortune on that. Using that criteria. A similar one that you can do for people that are into stocks, you look at long-term trends. Again, identify quality companies. And Warren Buffett talks about this. It's cyclical. Price is cyclical. It goes up and down. That doesn't mean the underlying value of that company has changed. And in many cases, if you're looking at quality companies, that underlying value hasn't changed. You can take, if you're into charting, you can take a long-term trend following tool. Say, you can just use a simple thing like a moving average, have two moving averages. When they cross over, that indicates a change in direction. So what you do is you look at stocks that where they've gone down in price. Your indication of an uptrend is the crossover of the two moving averages, that's a very basic trend following tool. So but you do it on long term. So you pick the say the monthly chart. This is what I use the monthly chart, because that then gives when the monthly chart shows that there's a long-term uptrend starting, it's gone down, down. Then you get the moving average crossover that shows, okay, it's starting to go up. That's when you start buying it. And if you just start buying it, then you'll ride this trend until such point as your indicator says that trend is over. And you'll because you're buying quality companies, it's low risk. It's not like, and what you find using that kind of technique where the long-term trend starts to indicate it's turning up, the market sentiment which drove it down has changed. So a lot, and you'll be able to get this for most of your listeners. I'm sure you have this in America, but we have that here with a lot of the stockbroking firms, or the trading platforms. They'll have the fundamentals and other stock analyst recommendations. You'll find that when that long-term, using the monthly chart, when that long-term trend indicator shows that it's going up, a lot of these analysts are starting to say buy it, and you find that it follows. It goes.
It follows the trend of going. Yeah. So
and real estate's very similar as well. Real estate, what you're looking for there, real estate, if you want to get to the principles of that, you're looking for scarcity, and real estate, real land is the scarce asset. So what you're looking for there is you're looking for, this is, I think you've heard it before, where you say buy the best house, the worst house in the best neighborhood. So, and when we say house, we're talking about land value here. So if you want really secure, yes, there'll always be people that want to buy apartments and things like that, which, if that's your thing, that's fine. Everyone has their own thing. But land is always, that's the scarce resource. So you have a lot more security around that. So if you buy, if you look in whatever the neighborhood is, and you look at, okay, what is the average price per square foot or square meter, if you're metric, for land in that area, and then you buy, you find an area that's, say, close to the shops or transport or whatever, where the price per meter or square foot is below that average, then the chances are that's going to increase. Again, very simple principle. It's not hard to do.
I love it. Let me take, because the audience is probably reeling like, oh my gosh, there's a lot. I mean, we went from mindset to relationship to mindset to finances. There's a lot going on.
I can
here.
Come back and do a part two if you want.
It's a lot. I love it. No, it's great. Just to summarize it for some people kind of listening, how we got into that kind of financial, stock, real estate conversation was basically, the first thing we talked about was kind of the one principle for earning money is focus on adding value, and then the three principles for wealth, like just creating wealth for yourself, was keep part of what you earn, invest, and reinvest. And I asked basically how do you invest, what do you invest in? So basically stocks, real estate, things of that nature is kind of what that means when it comes to investing. I do have a couple of questions.
The third one to add to that would be businesses as well, which stocks is part of that. But you can
invest in
you can actually invest in. But again, it's a specialized skill. You work in, as Warren Buffett talks about, you work in your circle of competence. So you stay within that. But business is the third area. So those three. Bonds is another one, but you don't get good returns on bonds.
Yeah. I do want to. I have a few more questions for you before we wrap this up, but I do want you to give a chance to, where can people find you?
Yeah, well, if you want to find me, it's pretty simple. Just Google me, Damian Andrews. I'm all over the front page. I haven't looked past the second page, but I'm every link on the front page. My web address is there, damianandrews.com, if you want to go directly to that. I also, my foundation, share.care, shair.care, which is set up, that stands for strong, healthy, and inspiring relationships. And I have a podcast there, which we have episodes most days going live. And there's a lot of really useful information there, interviews with great people like yourself. We have, as you do, we have these kind of things. So that they're probably the key areas where you can find me and reach out. I have multiple numbers. I have a US number. It's in New York, but it is a US number if you wanted to actually ring old school style. I am older than I look, and there's or you can contact via email. But through you said Google me. I come up on LinkedIn. I'm there from time to time, but mostly it's through my website, damianandrews.com.
And most of this will be in the show notes, so feel free to click on the links below, and so you can connect with Damian. Awesome, I appreciate that. So 3 quick questions for you. First question is, what is sliding elephants through eyes of needles? And people who aren't watching, if you're just listening on the podcast, that's something that's in his background right now. It just says sliding elephants through the eyes of needles. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, it's about making the impossible possible. I mean, that's part of what I believe. I don't think there is anything that's impossible. It's just a matter of how we do it. And there's a statement that says, the person that's saying it's impossible is quickly overtaken by someone that's found a way of doing it. And that's where it said, from my perspective, it's always been about finding an easier way to do things, a simpler way to do things, and finding, making that possible. And that's a metaphor for, making the impossible possible.
I love that. Second question is, who's better, Captain Kirk or Captain Picard, for the Star Trek people out there listening?
Oh, that's a really difficult question for me to answer, because I remember I watched a little bit of the Star Trek series, the original, when I was a kid at my grandmother's house. And then when I was in Perth, back when the Next Gen series came out, we actually had an organization. There was an organization called West Trek, and they actually had VHS tapes back for the millennials won't even know what that is, but they recorded it over there and sent it over here, and we sat around in a hall watching the episodes because they weren't broadcast here. But I think if it was, I'd have to say it's kind of like which is best James Bond.
Daniel. I mean, Sean Connery, but then Daniel Craig. I mean, that's easy.
But it's I like Captain Kirk because he had a different flair, different charisma. He was a little bit more lighter, whereas Captain Kirk seemed to be more, I shouldn't say more honorable, but he was more serious, and certainly you could count on his principles much more. So both, depending on what you were looking for, I like to embody a bit of both. So I like to have a bit of fun, but maintain my principles. But I think I remember an interview with Patrick Stewart, and they were talking about how he exploded at all the staff once because they were having, all the actors, because they're having too much fun on the set. And he looks back and then goes, I couldn't believe I did that. Because he was very serious about this captain role, and the captain was a very, very serious person. And you don't often see him unless he's, you don't often see him laughing, or whereas Captain Kirk seemed to be a bit more fun and a bit lighter. So I haven't given you an answer there.
No, you haven't. So I'm gonna go with Captain Kirk, and I like Captain Kirk more just because of the new movies that came out in the last 10 years. I think that's kind of where I lean Captain Kirk. But it's not a huge Trekkie, but someone who's seen the movies and some of the shows. And the last question is, we've been through a lot.
Captain Pike has done really well too. If you're going to throw that in,
Admiral Pike has been great. Yeah.
I'm talking about the Strange New World series, which is started recently.
I haven't seen that, so maybe I'll have
which
to
is probably some of the best. Even better than the movies. So, but yeah,
fair enough. Last thing, we've been through a lot today. We've gone through conscious, unconscious thinking. We've gone through finance, gone through relationship, everything. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with? Last final thoughts.
Yeah, the one thing I would leave the audience with is really take the time to get to know yourself and look for the good things within you. Separate what you do. So it's important to separate your behaviors from who you are as a person, because I believe majority of people, there'll be a very few on the extreme, but majority of people are good people in their heart. And sometimes we do things, we've had that experience where we've got upset with someone. It's not really what we meant, and it's certainly not what we felt about that person. And then we beat ourselves up because of that and go, oh, we shouldn't have said that, shouldn't have done that. Give yourself a bit of a break that, you're a good person. Yes, your behavior might need to improve. And so separating who you are as a person from your behaviors, because they're two very different things. Always love yourself as a person, that you're a wonderful person, and you are inside. Sometimes behaviors might need to work, and that's okay. That's part of the human process that we go through. Part of being a person is that you grow and develop, and you learn to deal with things differently. So that would be my takeaway. Separate who you are as a person from your behaviors.
I love that. Very powerful way to end the show. Damian, thank you so much for coming on.
It's such a pleasure, Scott. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Absolutely.